So your skin is a perfect feedback display of what's going on in your gut. And the skin is the largest organ that detoxifies the body, right? When we sweat, when we exfoliate, when we lose dead skin cells, all of those things are being eliminated through the skin, the surface of the skin. So if someone's got chronic acne, or if they've got eczema or psoriasis, we need to look at what's going on in the gut.
Today we're unpacking leaky gut with Brendan Coates, the gut whisperer. Leaky gut might sound like just another buzzword, but it could be the sneaky reason behind your skin flare-ups, mental fog, or that drained feeling. Brendan, who went from bodybuilding to clinical nutritionist, is here to cut through the noise, explaining what leaky gut is and how it's throwing your body off balance. He'll break down how to test for it, separating it from food sensitivities, and share straight-up advice, like the foods that can patch up your gut and why you should skip eating when stress hits. These are tweaks that you can fit into your chaotic day, even with work and kids in the mix. So if you're after a smarter way to boost your health, this episode is your must listen. Let's dive in. Good morning, Brendan. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me today.
Morning, Joe Steele. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Starting just like at the basics with people, what's this sort of scoop on leaky gut syndrome? I see it pop up a lot on Instagram ads. I see blogs, posts like that. I don't really know that the average person understands why it keeps showing up everywhere in health conversations. So if you don't mind just giving like a basic breakdown of what it is.
Sure. My first mentor, he actually wrote his master's thesis on leaky gut 30 years ago. Not a lot of people knew what leaky gut was 30 years ago, and he was ahead of his time. He was obviously taught by some incredible legends that knew about leaky gut. But basically, if we were to just give you a Cliff's Notes, the gut is responsible for two functions. It acts as a unilateral sort of purpose. One, it's to prevent pathogens, bacteria, virus, toxins from essentially entering into the body's bloodstream. And so that gut prevents that from happening. And then the other factor is where it just absorbs, right? The gut absorbs all of the food and the fuel that we're eating and then utilizes it and distributes it accordingly into the brain, the eyes, the heart, cardiovascular system, and just appropriately distributes the fuel. So the gut is responsible for two things: preventing essentially bad things from coming in and also absorbing the good things.
I've been going to the doctors for decades, right? I've never heard my physician or other, growing up, that term being brought up in the medical community. Like,
right.
Is it something where like there's skepticism, or they just don't know enough about it? Or how does it kind of fit into your average general practitioner experience?
Typically, modern medicine, Western medicine, does not recognize the term leaky gut. So that's why you didn't hear it in conversation or passing with your GP or MD, or even specialists for that matter. They don't recognize leaky gut. The proper terminology is intestinal permeability. That's the proper term. And again, a lot of people don't even use that word. However, functional medicine practitioners, holistic practitioners, those that really understand sort of ancient holistic modalities, they recognize leaky gut. And it is widely accepted amongst practitioners that practice functional medicine and holistic medicine. But again, since there's such a gap with holistic medicine and functional medicine and then Western medicine, that's why there's so much division. That's why it's not really talked about. There's a little bit of a shift happening. Some practitioners and some sort of Western trained doctors are starting to even entertain the idea of discussing it and presenting that word. But interestingly enough, they'll most likely use the term IBS or IBD, which is just basically an idiopathic term for crazy gut issues and fluctuating between diarrhea and constipation. And they don't really know exactly what the cause is. So they just give the umbrella statement as IBS or IBD. But ultimately they're meaning leaky gut, but they just don't use that word.
I definitely see people coming around to it more. Like I said, I see it more widespread now than I used to. Again, that's how I sort of, when I saw that in your Instagram, I was like, okay, this is like, I think people want to hear about this because it is getting a little more prevalent, but not to the point where I think people, again, they might be told it's IBS, but it could be more. Can you explain like the process of like how it affects the average, I don't know, maybe not the average person, but how it does affect people?
Yeah, of course. So leaky gut, it affects everyone. And in my experience, pretty much everyone has varying degrees of leaky gut. And the body strategically, on purpose, allows some undigested foods and some particles and some things to essentially enter into the bloodstream on purpose to allow an immune response to happen. So it's all strategically. But there's something called transient permeability or chronic permeability, where when someone essentially loses that ability where the cells are able to remain integral and tight, they're damaged and they're chronically damaged. That's where someone's got chronic leaky gut. So what happens is when someone has leaky gut, basically, predominantly, they're going to have undigested foods essentially invading in between those cells that line the gut into the systemic bloodstream. And when those undigested proteins, or even food additives, artificial sweeteners, environmental toxins, things of that nature, prescription drugs for that matter, all of the things that don't belong, right? Those types of things should essentially be eliminated through fecal matter because the body is strategically binding to them and not letting them get absorbed and then out through the rectum, out through feces. But when that system's compromised, like I said, those things essentially enter into the bloodstream, causing an immune response. And if that continuously happens over and over and over, so for example, the regular people will have toast and eggs for breakfast, and then they'll have maybe a tortilla or a wrap for lunch. Maybe they'll have pasta for dinner. And in the case of gluten, where most people are not able to digest gluten, there's a compound in it called alpha-gliadin, and it's a single peptide. And those peptides will trigger and stimulate something called zonulin, which resides on the epithelial cells. And the zonulin, on purpose, will initiate the cascading of those cells to open up, to allow the gluten to invade into the systemic bloodstream for the immune system to launch an attack on purpose. And so the immune system is very, very smart. It does that on purpose. But what happens is if you continuously consume gluten, for example, or things that cause damage to your gut, it's something called loss of oral tolerance. And what happens is your immune system can no longer attack those pathogens that you're continuously exposing your body to. And that's where the autoimmune system comes in. And that's where the body starts to attack other neighboring tissue on purpose because those compounds continuously cause damage on other regions in the body. So ongoing exposure and ongoing leaky gut will lead to an autoimmune condition. And so the symptoms and signs that people are experiencing, it might not be associated, or they may not be able to associate it to their gut. For example, psoriasis or eczema. They think that they've got a topical skin issue, but the underlying issue is they've got compromised digestion and they've got a leaky gut. And so if they can fix that and then remove the assaulting pathogens, then technically by rights, their skin should start to get better. So it's a really interesting, complex system, but at the same time, it's not really that complex if you understand it.
Is it fair to say it does affect people in different ways? Like one person might get skin, a presentation of some sort of irritation. Does it affect people based on age, like elderly versus children
Sure.
versus, genders, or any sort of like science behind that?
Yeah, we can look at genetics, we can look at age, we can look at environmental factors, where they're living, socioeconomic status. We can look at nutritional tendencies and lifestyle habits. All of those things come into factor. Genetics really only play maybe a 10 to 15% factor. So we need to look at epigenetics more so than genetics. Epigenetics mean basically, and you just asked, for example, if someone's displaying skin issues and the next person might display joint issues, the next person might display thyroid issues. Basically, whoever the weakest link is in that person's genetics that's where the chronic illness or the challenge will be displayed. So it's wherever their weakest link is in their genes. It doesn't mean that it's their genetics. It just means that wherever the weakest link is in their body, that's where they're going to be displaying the symptoms. So, for example, women are more susceptible to developing Hashimoto's. There's a lot of factors that lead to that. There's psychological factors where oftentimes women compared to men are more likely to suppress their voice and their opinion. And so where's that? That's in their throat. So energetically, that's a factor. Who wears more makeup typically? Women do, right? And so there's compounds in makeup called xenoestrogens, and those compounds tend to sort of coagulate around the thyroid. And so the immune system is trying to launch an attack on those pathogens, those xenoestrogens found in makeup and those plastics, for example. And then through collateral damage, they're going to start to attack the thyroid tissue. It's not by accident, but it's because the thyroid tissue is starting to get damaged by those xenoestrogens. And so therefore that leads to the probability or the likeliness of a woman getting, for example, Hashimoto's, because more women are wearing more makeup. So that's a factor to look at. So there's so many factors to consider. And like I said, it's the weakest link in someone's genetics will usually display where that symptom is going to display itself.
So taking something like this skin, acne, rashes, whatever it might be, what's like happening under the surface in this sense of why is it presenting itself in terms of maybe acne, if that's a fair assumption that
easy one. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Remember when I don't know if you remember, but I certainly remember I fell victim to falling in the trap of buying Proactive for my skin. Do you remember that product?
Yeah, I remember that brand.
Yeah. They did a great job at marketing to teenagers and
they had celebrity endorsements, right?
Yeah. So I thought that my acne, and I didn't have acne, but I thought that it was a topical issue. And so I'm scrubbing, I'm exfoliating, I'm doing all the things that so many teenagers are told to do. But the truth of the matter is most teenagers are eating high sugary meals. They may or may not have taken antibiotics because they had strep throat, for example. I myself took many rounds of antibiotics against my mom's wishes because I continuously got strep throat. So your skin is a perfect feedback display of what's going on in your gut. And the skin is the largest organ that detoxifies the body, right? When we sweat, when we exfoliate, when we lose dead skin cells, all of those things are being eliminated through the skin, the surface of the skin. So if someone's got chronic acne or if they've got eczema or psoriasis, we need to look at what's going on in the gut, because if there is imbalance in the gut, there's, imbalanced bacteria, the liver is perhaps toxic and it's producing toxic bile and it can't efficiently detoxify the body, then what happens is those pathogens, they start to go and invade into the systemic bloodstream. And then some of those pathogens and toxins, they need to be surfaced somehow. And so they start to surface through the skin. And now the skin is beautifully demonstrating feedback, signs and symptoms, letting you know that, hey, there's a bacterial imbalance. Maybe there's a hormonal imbalance. Maybe the body's not quite alkaline and it's too acidic. And so a pimple or a rash or eczema or psoriasis, those are all degrees of leaky gut, right? So if you've got mild leaky gut, you'll probably have just some acne. But if you've got more severe, then you're going to get eczema. If you've got even a really more severe, you're going to have psoriasis. So the signs and the symptoms that the body is demonstrating is just beautiful feedback to let you know, hey, there's something going on internally. And so it just takes some critical looking and looking deeper into the root cause to understand and address what the culprit is. But it's in the case of the skin, it's not, the symptom is not the problem. It's just an expression. We need to look further upstream to figure out what the culprit is.
Because I've seen like the gut brain connection link. When you're dealing with this, how does this mess with people in terms of like their mood or maybe their focus?
Great question. There's something called the autonomic nervous system, right? Parasympathetic and sympathetic. And our perceptions, how we perceive the world through our senses, smell, taste, touch, hear, and see, how we perceive stressors and events will ultimately dictate our autonomic nervous system, right? If something is supporting us, we're going to be activating more our parasympathetic state. If something's challenging us, it's going to be waking up and stimulating our sympathetic state. It's fair to say most people are walking around more challenged than supported. They're more stressed. They've got resentment towards past events that they haven't been able to find the hidden order of and resolve. Maybe they've got resentment towards their parents or an ex or a coworker or even a child or the person that cut them off that morning on the way to work, whatever the case may be. But when you are in a chronic state of stress, you're activating your sympathetic nervous system, not parasympathetic. So sympathetic is fight and flight. And so guess what's not happening when you are in a sympathetic state? You're not digesting, right? The stomach and the digestive process essentially shuts down because you're in a state of fight and flight. So when those stress hormones are being activated, norepinephrine, cortisol, testosterone, insulin, glucagon, all of those systems are essentially triggering and stimulating the adrenaline glands to secrete those stress hormones and to secrete energy, glucose, glycogen to the extremities of the body, to the muscles. So we can either fight or flight. And so all of the energy is not going to the stomach. And so if someone's in that chronic state of stress, they're not digesting. And so their brain is not sending signals through the vagus nerve downwards to the gut to allow those digestive juices and hormones to do their thing because they're stressed. Whereas if you are in a relaxed state, and if you are sort of more dominant in your parasympathetic state, then the brain is in a position to signal those relaxation hormones and neurotransmitters, acetylcholine, dopamine, as well as the body's ability to digest. So it can signal to the hydrochloric acid, to the pancreas to release the digestive enzymes. So all of that energy, all of that blood is going to the stomach and allow for digestion because you're in that rested state. But again, with that gut-brain connection, most people are more so dominant in the sympathetic. And so when you talked about the gut-brain relationship, the amount of signals that go from the brain down the vagus nerve down to the gut is outnumbered almost 100 to 1 in terms of the signals that go from the gut up the vagus nerve to the brain. So for every one signal that's going down from the brain to the gut, there's 100 signals going from the gut to the brain up top here. So our stomach and our gut, it really is our second brain.
Yeah. I believe you have a background like substance abuse consulting.
Yeah.
Which is pretty unique, right? I know there's a sports background too, but I wanted to ask you, how does if it does that tie into addiction and recovery? Like, if so, what can that sort of teach us about just in general, how these two things work for people that are maybe dealing with some sort of addiction or going through recovery?
Yeah, I fell into that position. I was so lucky. I met a director of the clinic at the time just through passing, and they were looking for alternative practitioners because they didn't want to practice the Western medicine model. And so when I came there, I presented them with the concept and the idea that we need to work on their gut health. And many of the doctors and the practitioners are like, what are you talking about? We just need to fix their addiction and their behaviors. And I said, yeah, well, their gut drives a lot of their addictions and their compulsions, all of those things. So we also need to look at anytime someone has an addiction, let's say to a substance, alcohol, cigarettes, heroin, cocaine, fentanyl, for example, that substance is not the problem. So they have a sub-addiction. Anytime someone has an addiction and they're pursuing something or substance, that's just a coping mechanism to escape from their sub-addiction. And their sub-addiction is actually what they're trying to escape from, whether it's boredom or scarcity or anxiety or trauma. I don't like using the word trauma, but people can associate that with a negative event that happened into their life. And whatever that event is, they're trying to manage that symptom, that thought process. And so they're leaning towards those substances. So when it comes to those behaviors, if we can identify some viable alternatives from, let's say, the cocaine or the substances, becoming addicted to the gym or becoming addicted to even cold plunges, because those release and those stimulate dopamine just as much as those substances do. So tying back to the gut, when individuals have imbalance of gut bacteria or they've got compromised digestion, we know that serotonin and dopamine are largely produced in the gut. And those neurotransmitters go up the vagus nerve into the hypothalamus and the pituitary and all of those glands for secretion, and also how we perceive stress and how our bodies and brains respond to events. And so if you've got an imbalanced gut, and if you've got a serious degree of pathogenic bacteria that thrive off of sugar, for example, then they're going to signal and they're going to trick the brain thinking that you've got cravings, right? You need that dopamine hit. And in the case when sugar is not necessarily available, what also gives them that same degree of a dopamine hit? A substance or a behavior, right? And those trigger that dopamine hit. And the more and more and more you require that dopamine hit, the more there's something called, it's more like a desensitization or a hedonic response where it becomes higher and higher and higher, the threshold where you need more and more and more of that hit. And that's where the addiction comes in. So it's recognizing that the addiction is caused by a sub-addiction, which is a behavioral issue. It usually comes in the form of an event that has not been resolved. finding a viable alternative for that substance or that behavior, which there are, and then ultimately addressing the gut and addressing that microbiome and providing good quality, healthy, nutrient-dense foods that provide nourishment and then can naturally allow the gut to produce those neurotransmitters where now you're just more balanced. But when someone's got addiction, I can honestly look at their diet and I can look at their gut and I know that they've got gut disruption, they've got compromised digestion, they probably have leaky gut. It really is an easy approach, but at the same time, not a lot of people recognize it. They would rather prescribe anti-anxiety medication or antidepressants or try to get them cold turkey to cut their substance, which is great, but they're not providing them with nutritional sound advice. They're just saying, okay, let's say you've done 30 days in the in-person inpatient clinic, but they haven't taught them any real life strategies to eat healthy foods and things like that.
Kind of made me wonder, like you said you had a mentor, I think that, was doing this way before everyone started kind of becoming aware of it. How was that person checking for leaky gut? And how do we check today? Like how much has it changed over those decades?
Yeah. In terms of checking for leaky gut, don't ask a doctor because they're not going to know. They're just going to be like, that's nonsense. Here's the thing. If you even suspect you've got gut-related issues, they might send you to a gastroenterologist for a colonoscopy. 9 times out of 10, the results are just going to come back inconclusive. They might be like, you've got a little bit of inflammation in the gut, or nothing seems to be anatomically incorrect, so you're good. But meanwhile, the person's dying with IBS or IBD and chronic constipation or diarrhea. There's amazing headway now with labs all across the United States and Canada. And you can now test through fecal testing various degrees of bacteria. You can test varying degrees of dead skin cells, and you can test for immune cells, elevated white blood cells, antibodies. You can also really look at the diversity of the bacteria. And so based on those findings, you can then conclude that this individual does in fact have varying degrees of leaky gut. So you can look at blood, you can look at fecal load, and those two can really be conclusive to let you know that someone does in fact have leaky gut. This was probably made available, I would say, within the last 10, 15 years, but it's really becoming pronounced now. There's a lot of testing companies and labs out there that are available. So it's not cheap. You're not going to get this from your doctor or your GP, but it's now available where if you find a practitioner like myself or others, you can literally get a test sent right to your home. You poop in a little bit of a cup and you send it back through FedEx and whatever, and then you've got your results. And then you see, in fact, you've got leaky gut. And then, of course, it gives you a roadmap and a protocol to fix that. But before, it was more so just bringing things back to basics, right? Fundamental nutrition. But now it's a lot more easier to diagnose, and it's just a lot more easier to give people the evidence showing that they've got leaky gut rather than sort of taking my word for it.
So the person does this test, they send it back to someone like yourself. The protocol, is it based on, okay, the person is maybe experiencing, like we mentioned before, rashes or skin issues or psoriasis, whatever it might be. Then they get in touch, they take the test. Then is it like, okay, because the psoriasis is here, we're going to attack it that way based on the findings in the fecal results?
Every practitioner is going to have their own approach, right? A naturopath is going to have their approach. A functional medicine doctor is going to have their own approach. Dietitians typically don't have access to order these tests. Sometimes they might, and they might have their own approach. And then holistic nutritionists might have their other approach. I've got an interesting approach because I always start with the gut, but I also start further upstream, and I start with digestion and the stomach acid. Not a lot of people even know how to talk about stomach acid, but let's say someone does get the diagnosis and it's clear as day that they've got leaky gut and they've got degrees of intestinal permeability, they've got elevated white blood cells, and they've got imbalance of bacteria. And then if we look at their symptoms, so let's say they've got symptoms with their skin issues. Okay, so we can have a 2-part approach. We can address the intestinal permeability with some compounds and some lifestyle interventions to heal, and nutritional strategies to heal and seal that gut. Because what's the point of trying to address the symptoms in the skin first if we haven't addressed the root cause. Mm-hmm. And so you can do both at the same time. And it's, we want to provide the client or the patient with symptom relief, right? No one, especially if those symptoms are really, really acutely terrible in pain. But that's also what Western medicine is for. They're beautiful at acute issues. So my approach would be, okay, once we've identified that the person has leaky gut, let's work on that gut. Let's work on healing and sealing the integrity of that gut. At the same time, sure, maybe there's some topical compounds, maybe there's some supplements that we can utilize to calm down that inflammation on the skin, clear up the skin, but also support the liver, support the kidneys, support those detoxification pathways to allow those pathogens or those toxins or those things that are essentially being surfaced through the skin. We got to eliminate those so that they can, so we've got like a new ground zero, like a new foundation. So it truly is a holistic approach, not just surface level, pardon the pun, with the skin. Yeah, the fecal test is ultimately the most conclusive way to check if you've got a leaky gut. And it all depends on how much you want to spend too. Food sensitivity tests are fantastic. We can look at nutrient profiles through just a dried blood drop, right? We can see if someone has nutrient deficiencies. We can see if someone has, let's say, elevated too much iron, for example, or low levels of vitamin D or low levels of selenium or low B12 or high B12. We can look at that, and that's great. That also gives you a real good snapshot of where they're at. Same thing with food sensitivities, right? Let's say someone does a food sensitivity test. Let's say someone comes back with, let's say 20 foods. And most people, when they do a food sensitivity test, they will see a long list of foods that they're sensitive to. And the usual response is, oh my God, I eat all of those foods. And so my answer is, well, yeah, of course, because you've got leaky gut. The cells are not integral. They're not doing their job. So those foods that you're eating, A, because you've got compromised digestion, low stomach acid, low pancreatic function, those foods are not being properly digested. And so those molecules of the foods are invading in between the cells that line the gut. They're going right into the systemic bloodstream. They're causing an immune response. The T cells and the B cells and the macrophages and the leukocytes, they're all recognizing those foods as foreign invaders. And so they're launching an attack. And so, of course, they're going to be sensitive to those foods because the immune system is doing its job and essentially attacking them. So it's nice to do the food sensitivity test, but an educated practitioner only needs the leaky gut test ultimately. And then with that, we can make a decision. Okay, let's just do a removal of pretty much all of the potentially problematic foods: corn, soy, nuts, legumes, dairy, wheat. Those are the usual culprits. And pretty much everyone benefits by eliminating those foods anyways. So if we can eliminate those temporarily, heal and seal the gut with some strategic supplements and nutritional protocols, then eventually we can reintroduce those foods one by one, and chances are they're not going to have any sensitive issues. But that's the approach that I go. So it's, to answer your question, those tests are not cheap. They are very, very helpful. And if someone really, really, really wants to get a true sort of Polaroid picture, like a snapshot of where they're at, those tests are wonderfully available and they work. It's just, usually providers and GPs and things like that, you're not going to get those tests and they're not going to provide them, and they're not usually covered with insurance. So the medical system is designed wonderfully for one reason: to make the medical system profitable, not necessarily to make people healthy.
That I agree.
Yeah.
Are there lifestyle habits that can contribute to leaky gut? Stress, maybe, scrolling, doom scrolling at night, are there anything we could be doing that's like not helping either, on top of all these, maybe food sensitivities?
Yeah. My approach with stress is, because, you can literally do hashtag stress management or Google stress management, and you're going to see all sorts of different modalities. And most people are going to say, what are the top 5? Breath work, meditation, write your gratitudes, do some grounding, get outside, right? Get some sunrise. All of those things are wonderful tools, and they do help with stress management. However, if we look at stress, again, as a wonderful feedback, a sign of feedback, then we can ask ourselves critically, okay, well, why are we finding this stressful? Well, ultimately, it goes down to human behavior. And if someone is pursuing their highest values or their telos, it's called the ancient Greeks, but basically they came up with teleology. Okay. It is the study of the end in mind. And we all live in accordance to our own highest values. And so that's also our chief aim and our telos. So when someone is pursuing their telos or their chief aim or their ontological purpose, the thing that inspires them the most, they're not stressed. Like, they're not stressed at all. They might pursue things that are stressful and challenging, but they're pursuing those things because they're on the way and they're on their ontological purpose. So, for example, let's say a mom and her highest values are to raise her beautiful children or her brand new newborn baby. When she's changing that dirty diaper, she might be, kind of cursing and being like, oh my God, this is so disgusting and smelly and all that stuff. But her oxytocin and her enkephalons and her dopamine might be through the roof because she is so in love and she is so in the moment tending to her baby that's not stressful. Why? Because her highest values are raising that beautiful child. Where, let's say, a babysitter might be doing the exact same thing, changing a dirty diaper, and her stress response is through the roof and cortisol is through the roof. So anytime someone is stressed, rather than looking at stress management and coping and all of those modalities which work, we need to ask ourselves a different question. Why is that person perceiving that event stressful? And are they pursuing their highest purpose? And if they're not pursuing their highest purpose, then if they're able to recognize that event or that thing that's causing them stress is actually feedback and trying to get them back into alignment with what they truly want to pursue, then they won't be stressed. Or asking a different question with regards to if something's stressing them out, find out how is that serving them and how is that particular stressor actually benefiting their highest value. And if they're able to identify the hidden order to the benefits of the thing that's stressing them out, then they're actually going to bounce their perceptions around that and they're not going to be stressed. So it's all about asking different questions and looking at a stressor with a different scope of sort of awareness and a different horizon. And the broader your horizon of awareness is, you realize there's really nothing really to stress you out. So
I like that approach. How about, like, can I call them the usual suspects, the legumes and the dairy, right? Are there sort of, like, going the flip side, like must eat foods, the nutrient dense foods that we should be eating regardless of whether we're sort of experiencing these potential leaky gut symptoms?
Yeah, that's also sort of a two-pronged approach, because let's face it, a lot of people, especially when they come to me, they're like, oh, I eat clean, right? And let's just say they're having organic chicken and organic broccoli and grass-fed steak and things of that nature. Most people are doing pretty good, right? But there is definitely a percentage of the foods that they're maybe treating themselves with, or like that 30% differentiating foods that are really problematic, right? And those foods, although maybe not being consumed every single day, maybe it's every other day, every third day, that causes so much damage that it's it's putting on more fuel to the fire, right? So even if you've got good intentions with other foods, it doesn't matter. So for example, meat, contrary to a lot of people who are vegans or vegetarians or what Western medicine is saying, meat's very, very healing. It truly, truly is, especially if it's coming from a ruminant animal, an animal with multiple chambers of stomachs. Remember, I don't know if you know this, but when Elvis died, they did the autopsy and they said that he had like hamburger and all sorts of things in his colon, right? Okay, sure. Maybe that's the truth, but we're negating the fact that he was on copious amounts of narcotics at that time, right? So was he pooping? No, he wasn't pooping because his body was in a chronic state of fight and flight. And so his body's holding on to a lot of those foods. Second, it's the food combinations that are problematic. So it wasn't necessarily the, let's say, hamburger meat that was the culprit, but it was the buns and the seed oils and the fermentation of other foods and the highly processed foods. all of those compounding with meat does not necessarily make for a wise recipe for good gut health.
Yeah, I think of Elvis. I think of the white bread, peanut butter, and banana, right? So it's probably Jif, right? And the white Wonder Bread, right?
Of course, right? So meat on its own, it's very healing. I can't remember the doctor, but he did an allergy test for hundreds and hundreds of people and hundreds of different types of foods. And guess what? The only food that pretty much didn't cause anyone an immune response was red meat. So what does that say? Now, what foods are usually helpful and what foods are sort of culprits to causing damage to the gut? I'm not a fan of nightshades. Okay. Nightshades are foods like tomatoes, eggplants. Those tend to cause a little bit of inflammation in the gut. And they've got compounds within the skins that are natural defense chemicals that prevent them from being eaten by insects and rodents and things of that nature. So when we continuously consume those types of vegetables, that puts a strain and a response on our immune system. Same thing with vegetables that are high in lectins. Those are those same defense chemicals on the skins or the seeds of the vegetables, and they prevent the rodents and the insects from eating them. Do you know who Dr. Stephen Gundry is?
Yeah, that's probably where I started to come around to the leaky gut. I think he's in California as well.
Yeah, so he's kind of like the authority on talking about lectins. When I was living with my mom and my sister years ago, she had a garden and she was growing tomatoes. And a little chipmunk took one of the cute little cherry tomatoes and then ran off, and I followed it, and it intuitively ate around the tomato. So it peeled the whole skin and it took out all the seeds. Why is that? Because those are all the defense chemicals that are in the seeds and the skin, but it ate the rest of the tomato. And so let's say you're Italian or you're Portuguese and your Nonna made homemade tomato sauce. What did they do typically?
Okay, they peeled them, yeah.
Boil them first, peel them, and then if you're really persistent, they would strain it all and take out all the seeds because they knew intuitively, right? Foods that are high in lectins, foods that are high in nightshades, I typically stay away from. Meat, very, very healing. Vegetables that are low in nightshades, great. Low in oxalates, stay away from the oxalates. Legumes, typically stay away from because they've got enzyme inhibitors and they cause a lot of bloating typically. So I would stay away from those. So what does that leave us to? Basic foods, holistic foods. So fruits, vegetables, and meat. That's essentially what our ancestors used to eat. And so if you've got challenges or problems, I would just recommend just go back to basics. Just eat plain meat, staying away from seed oils and deep fried foods and all that stuff. Go with some basic vegetables and some basic fruit that are in season, and you should be good. And just remember to chew your food. It's really important.
How do you sort of like get kids to sort of buy into the nutrient dense mentality of like,
you don't.
Yeah.
You don't.
Let it be kids?
No, guess who you get to buy into it? You get the parents to buy into it. That's where it starts. I literally have an intake for a child, and I'm not going to say their name, obviously,
sure.
But check out
John Smith. Yeah.
Check out what they're eating. Okay. Sunday, French toast, chocolate milk, snack, 2 Oreos. Monday, cereal, squishmallow. So that's like a marshmallow type, I don't know. Something. Sugar bomb, yeah. Snack, 2 gummy worms. Oh. Following day, same cereal with apple juice, and then snack shortly after, small bowl of popcorn. Next day, same cereal, apple juice, snack, vanilla ice cream. And the next day, the same thing, or 2 more days with pancakes, vanilla ice cream, the snack. And this child has some real challenges. Every day has tacos, but on a gluten wrap with cheese, with sour cream, apple juice every meal. We got pizza, more apple juice. And then in the evening, leftover tortilla wraps, vanilla ice cream, gummy worms, cereal again, pizza. And the parents wonder why the child has so many health issues. And it breaks my heart because it's not the child's fault, but the child will develop eating habits based on what the parents will feed them. And so no parent has ill intentions. They're doing the best with the knowledge that they have. And no parent wants to have a child that's sick. But how do we fix the problem? So it's kind of like a captain and its ship. If the captain is sick, the whole crew is going to follow what the captain's doing. But if the captain is steadfast and healthy, then the whole crew will be. And so ultimately, the children are not the problem. The problem lies with the lack of education and the planning and being vigilant and really, looking after themselves. That's why my job will be continuously never ending, because I'm always working with people that really need to learn how to fundamentally eat. There's been such a disconnect. There really has.
I can imagine. Are there maybe something surprising that you've come across, maybe a common food that people may not realize is causing their gut trouble?
Yeah, the usual culprits. You've probably heard this before, but gluten truly is. Gluten is, you got to stay away from it. It's not the same as what it used to be 50 years ago, 100 years ago, the wheat and the grains, as well as the way big agriculture and farmers are cropping these grains. They are using genetically modified seeds now, or hybridized seeds. They're also spraying them with copious amounts of glyphosate and other pesticides and herbicides, which ultimately penetrate into the seed and into the grain, and then we're consuming them. So not only are you consuming a grain or a wheat that's very difficult to digest, which causes an immune response, it's also laden with these chemicals. So that's really got to stay away from that. Artificial sweeteners, the 0-calorie barbecue sauces and the 0-calorie additives for the pops and the coffee additives, those things completely disrupt the gut. They really impede the body's ability to utilize glucose in a healthy manner, because they ultimately, they sort of retard receptor sites that absorb sugar. So sure, something might be 0 calories with the artificial sweeteners, but when that person does end up consuming a form of glucose in the form of a different food, they can't actually absorb it. And so what happens? The body's like, well, we got to do something with this sugar. So out comes the liver, out comes the insulin. Insulin binds to it. It's like, okay, well, we're not driving it into those receptor sites because they've been essentially retarded from those artificial sweeteners. What do we do with it? All right, we got to store it as fat. And fat's hard to get rid of. So it's artificial sweeteners, it's the processed foods, gluten, typically dairy I'd stay away from as well, because it's coming from factory farmed animals, totally taking antibiotics and hormones. Those proteins, dairy is coming into the body, causing an immune response, weakening the immune system. So to answer your question again, dairy, gluten, grains, seed oils, artificial sweeteners, I would stay away from like the plague.
Yeah, yeah. Are there things on the horizon that might help, maybe like more breakthroughs that you're seeing, or I guess science coming to the realization that this is a real thing and can help us start to prevent this more, like kind of getting ahead of things before there's even issues?
It's definitely an uphill battle, for sure. There is such a disconnect and a sense of blissful ignorance when it comes to the general society. They just put their heads in the sand and they don't want to admit that what they're doing is the problem. Why does America have the greatest mortality rate amongst children? Why does America have the greatest obesity rate? Why does America have the highest rate in autism? Why is the health system have such a huge expenditure, and yet it's the unhealthiest in the world? Why is there so much money being spent on children's education, and yet they're the lowest scoring educational rating students around the world? So we need to ask ourselves these different questions. And where is it ultimately coming from? It's coming from the foods that we're eating. It's coming from the things that we are being exposed to. I feel is that we're in a wonderful time where there's a shift where functional medicine and holistic medicine are starting to be discussed more often. Like, look, what are we doing right now? How cool is this? We're having a podcast and we're talking about functional medicine. We're talking about leaky gut. We're talking about a little bit of differently approached things that typical Western medicine does not discuss. And so it's having these conversations. It's having people that want to question everything, right? So it is an amazing time, but at the same time, we are at the most challenging time that we've ever been at, because population continues to increase and we are sicker more than ever. So it's interesting, right? Like there's There's longevity. There's people that are pursuing this and they're getting healthier. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that are very, very unhealthy.
Yeah, it really is as simple as you laid it out, getting back to those nutrient dense foods, which are pretty good for everyone, right? There's not going
Yeah,
to
of
be.
course they are. Yeah. Do no harm. Do no
Yeah.
harm.
Can you speak to like how that someone who's listening that's like, okay, this guy's awesome. I want to work with him. I heard about, he can test from this to this. What can we learn about, your program just here in this conversation?
Yeah, I practice the lost art of reacidifying the stomach. Schools don't teach it. Practitioners don't really recognize it. It's very difficult to understand. It's hard to even describe what my protocol entails because I always go back to the gut. That's the pinnacle of health. But most people don't associate and correlate their symptoms with their gut, right? So let's say someone's got hormonal issues, or let's say someone's dealing with being overweight and they want to lose maybe 30 pounds or 40 pounds or something. Or let's say someone's got brain fog, or let's say someone's got anxiety and depression. It's hard even for someone who's in a mental state like that to even make a decision for that matter because they're already in a rut. And so they just want a life jacket. They just want to be able to breathe. And it's difficult to be accountable and recognize that the problem lies within their food choices. They would rather put a Band-Aid on the symptoms and they would rather somehow try to dissolve that symptom without being accountable and without ultimately addressing the root cause. It's their food. It's their lifestyle. It's the things that they've been doing for the last, however old you are, 20 years or 30 years or 40 years or 60 years. Everything that's led up to you in this moment, usually it comes from the form of food. So my approach, I love working with people that want to learn because that's how I teach. I can't give someone results without teaching them because at the end of the day, most people are going to, let's say, a doctor or let's say an online coach, or they're doing a challenge, and sure, they might get some results, but they haven't been taught the tools to prevent the thing that they're trying to get rid of from happening in the first place. So if you can learn the nuances of what led to a leaky gut, if you can learn how the weight gain happened, if you can learn how the hormones got disrupted, if you can learn how the immune system is, let's say, attacking your thyroid, for example, or for someone who's got Parkinson's or someone's got MS, they learn why the immune system is attacking the nerves, for example. Then all of a sudden, all of their symptoms make more sense. And they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And now, so you're mean to tell me that if I fix my leaky gut, my immune system can start to heal other body systems? Yes. And so most people just want the Band-Aid, but it's really amazing working with people that do want to put in the work because their whole life changes. It's just like, they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize stomach acid had such a big deal with digestion. I didn't realize my pancreas had such a major role in absorbing nutrients. It's being accountable and recognizing that the main culprit is a leaky gut and digestion. And when you fix that, all other body systems start to heal and fix themselves by default, which is really fun.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. Like, how can someone reach out to you specifically? I know you're active on Instagram. But what's like the website to kind of find you at and learn more about your program?
Yeah, my website, it's dated. Oh my God, Joe, it's dated. But this is the thing. I've dedicated almost 15 years in education. I've got my doctorate's degree in functional medicine, holistic nutrition. I just fix guts. So my weaknesses are marketing, website, sales. I'm not good at any of that stuff. I fix guts. So my website is old. It's like really old, bodiesbybrendan.com. And then my Instagram is The Gut Whisperer. That's where I'm most dominant. And then my YouTube channel is, I believe it's The Gut Whisperer, or it's like at The Gut Gang. And those are all easy ways to find me and get a hold of me and follow me. I have got a podcast as well, but it's not glamorous. I don't have wonderful sales funnels and things like that of that nature, but I fix guts. That's my strength.
For the next 20 minutes, if you click the... yeah,
exactly.
You're not going to get that. Yeah.
No.
You're just down to actual helping people, not taking their money.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of that. So
yeah. Well, listen, man, thank you so much. It's been great to talk with you. I mean, I've got a master class here in leaky gut, and I'm very interested in learning more about you. I know you're putting on an event this year, a very big event. Where that's in Canada?
It's in Canada, yeah. So I'm the host of Canada's largest biohacking and longevity expo. We're in our third year. It's August 9th, 10th, and 11th here in Toronto. Dr. John DeMartini is speaking. Dr. Tom O'Brien is speaking. We've got another expert who's a mold and toxicity expert. So it's a full 3 days of conferences and educational speakers, as well as an interactive expo where there's a lot of vendors showcasing their products and services. And that's ultimately my mission, is just to provide consumers education, and so they can make a wise decision on whatever modality that they want to buy. Let's say it's a red light. Let's say it's a sauna or a cold plunge or whatever. There's so many influencers and personalities and brands, and there's so much out there. It's overwhelming. It really is. And so my job, I just want to bring people together to educate them so that they can make an educated decision. My first mentor, Dr. Nandor Bajuz, he said that we are leaving, or we're transitioning from the information era into the knowledge era. And there's a difference, right? There's information and there's knowledge and then there's wisdom. So it's being able to utilize all that information with some wisdom and knowledge and make sound decisions, because it's tough out there. It really is.
100% agree there. Well, I will make sure all these links from your Instagram to your, expo, everything is in the show notes for people listening.
Thank you.
Of course, yeah, and thank you, really, truly, for talking today, getting to know you, and sharing all of that insight with the audience. So yeah, I'll definitely put all your links in there, so everyone check out Brendan when you get the time to connect with him offline. Thank you so much for your time, though, Brendan. Great to get to know you.
Thank you. And just one bit of closing words for your listenership and for your viewership. If you're not going to do anything, just consider your gut, chew your foods, and try to stay away from drinking excessive liquids with your meals. You don't want to water down that stomach acid. Just try to remember that if you're stressed, that's one of the worst things that you can do when you're eating. If you're stressed, if you're angry, if you've got sort of sadness, don't eat. That's one of the easiest and one of the best strategies that I would say.
Yeah, no stress eating.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Yeah, eat when you're happy.
That's great parting advice. Thank you again, Brendan.
Thank you so much.